What to you does sustainability mean in football today?
Football breaks every rule of running a proper business. You just don't know what's going to happen.
It means different things for different clubs because of the business system and some of the forces in the business system. Crazy cliff edge economics in football where, really small things can decide like a huge swing in numbers.
Revenue growth since the Premier League started is 3,112%. Wages are up 4,100%, transfer spends up 4,600%. So therefore, you've got a business which is great at bringing the money in and absolutely appalling at controlling costs.
For a club to be sustainable, you have to be able to manage your cash flow, and you need to have
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Likewise.
Well, as I mentioned, a broad topic to kick off with. So let's start with it very simply. To all of you, and maybe let's start with you, Rasmus, let's ask about the sustainability question. What to you does sustainability mean in football today?
Well, I think depends. It means different things for different clubs, but for me, it means that you have a business model that's not dependent on external funding. I think this is a very difficult thing in football because of the business system and some of the forces in the business system. Like we have these, crazy cliff edge economics in football where, really small things can decide like a huge swing in numbers. I mean, the best example of that is probably I've been myself in the playoff final 3 times, 2 times with Cliff at Brentford, and it's quite nerve-wracking experience because the winner takes probably guaranteed 250 million, including the parachute payments over the next 3 years, and the loser takes the gate receipts from the game. So, and it can be, we lost one final in injury time on a free kick, and so it's huge swings. It's difficult to manage that when you have quite a fixed cost base. And then also, I think you are competing in football against a lot of clubs, a lot of owners that don't really own the football clubs to make money on it, but as more of a trophy assets. And obviously, we compete in the same market for all the players, so it drives up the cost for everyone if you have these sort of utility ownership models. And some of these things just makes it incredibly difficult and much more difficult than people tend to think of running a football club sustainably.
Cliff, does that resonate with you? Sustainability and the definition?
It resonates, but for me, it's all about cash flow. For a club to be sustainable, you have to be able to manage your cash flow, and you need to have plan B. So to deal with the very things that Rasmus has just mentioned, they shouldn't come as a big shock because we all know what can happen in football from one game to the next. So being aware of how you deal with that and what actions you would need to take. But fundamentally, you have to be all over your cash and understanding the impact of different scenarios over, I would suggest, a 3-year period, as hard as that is to obviously forecast, but under different scenarios you can create those forecasts, and that gives you the benchmark on which you can then manage your cash flow, because without cash you're dead.
Kieran, in the beautiful position of independent assessor, how do we feel?
Football's unique in the sense that if we contrast it with American sport, if you take the NFL, the objective of every owner is identical. It's to make as much money. We've got a closed league. We've got a fixed cost base, which is very easy to control. Football is completely different because, as guys have already said, we've got this merging of ownership objectives. You've got the American owners who want to transfer that model into European football. You've got the socios model, which is all about glory. You've got the people that want to treat a football club as an extension of themselves, as a trophy asset. They own yachts, they own helicopters, they own racehorses. They all lose money as hobbies. Why not have a football club that loses money as a hobby as well? And that's fine, provided everybody else has got the same approach. So it's this merging of the business models, which for me keeps me very busy. But as Cliff said, in terms of cash flow, it's an absolute nightmare, because if you're willing to outbid people, then that creates a new benchmark. If we go back to, I know you're a Chelsea fan, if we go back to the arrival of Roman Abramovich, it cost him €1.1 million a week for 19 years to run Chelsea Football Club, and for that he got a free car park pass and some trophies. But the trophies were worth the investment. How can you possibly call that a business model in any normal form?
Rasmus, there was a really interesting thing when I was taking a look at some of the conversations you'd had beforehand, and you made a link between the pharmaceutical industry and airline industry and how you can look at football. And I wanted you to just explain that for people here, because for me personally, looking at it like that, it suddenly made me think slightly differently.
Yeah, no, I think it comes down to that when people, fans and other people who observe the game from the outside, there seems to be this tendency to feel that if just football clubs were run by responsible, competent people, then they would make profits, it wouldn't be a problem, you know. But really what they don't understand is the industry structure is so challenging to control cost then. And the example I gave was like, you have a pharmaceutical industry, which is a bit like American sports. Like you have all these guardrails that protect, you know, high exit barriers and high entry barriers. Like you have a lot of things structurally that means that even an average performing company in that industry can be very profitable. And then you have airline industry where everyone loses money because you have price wars. You have when Delta gives free meals, United Airlines have to do the same, and so they don't get more revenue, but they drive up each other's costs. So I'm just saying football industry has a lot more in common with the airline industry than with the pharmaceutical industry. And I think when you have these conversations about football finances, it's important to understand that you are operating an environment that have some characteristics that just makes it really difficult, especially on the sort of cost side, because as Frederick showed on the slides before, football had for a mature industry had pretty good revenue growth. But the problem is that if you draw a line of the revenue growth and you draw a line of the player wages growth, it sort of looks the same. Every time you make another £10, they go in the pocket of the players. So there's one of the structural issues. Yeah.
And Cliff, you have been in control of a club that has gone from League One to the Premier League. So in the context of the conversation where we want to look at how you can succeed on the pitch and create great business off it, how have you managed to do that while being in charge of Brentford?
Well, it's been a huge team effort. It's a lot of people that are aligned. And we use alignment a lot inside the club because from the very top all the way down, everybody is aligned on the goals that we're trying to achieve. And obviously we've been pretty successful in terms of our recruitment and development of players. But just going back to this issue of managing the sustainability of a football club, there are lots of examples of football clubs that lose money on a regular basis but have grown in value. So I remember sitting in a room nearly 40 years ago when David Dein was announced as a new shareholder at Arsenal. And he put in £300,000 and subsequently sold for tens of millions many years later. And there's lots of examples of football clubs that despite all the losses are worth more today than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. So when you're investing, if you can afford to fund those losses, and the club does well and becomes successful and perhaps gets promoted to the Premier League like we did or gets into Europe, you have grown the value of your asset.
I guess the problem comes when, as Rasmus highlighted, the playoff final is lost and not won, and a model is geared towards that match being won. that, as you said at the beginning, something really interesting, that plan B,
Yeah.
having that being probably the most important thing in any structure, to be able to actually then implement, not collapse, for want of a better word, if something doesn't go to plan.
Yeah. I mean, I would never advocate anyone planning on winning a playoff final. That's bonkers. I would much rather people plan to lose the playoff final, and then if you win, you're in the money. But the key is to constantly understand where you are to make sure that you've got the financial resources to make it happen. And sometimes that means selling players, and sometimes it means investing. But understanding where you are is fundamental.
It feeds into the question I was going to ask Kieran, which is, what do you think most people misunderstand about the finances of running a football club?
Well, I think we've already hinted on this. If we take a look at Premier League history, for example, I've got every single set of accounts for every single Premier League club on this iPad here. Revenue growth since the Premier League started is 3,112% since 1992. Now, that's during a period in which consumer inflation has gone up by 130. That's a fantastic achievement, but I come from a corporate bankruptcy background before I went into teaching. And we always say there, revenue is vanity. And all of this focus on growing the revenues is crazy, because revenues are up 3,100%, wages are up 4,100%, transfer spend's up 4,600%. So therefore, you've got a business which is great at bringing the money in and absolutely appalling at controlling costs. So therefore, that's the what. You then have to focus on the why. Why is this? And it is the fact that we measure success in football, not in terms of a financial return on investment. You measure success in terms of what happens on the pitch. The most profitable football club in the history of the Premier League is Spurs. But Spurs don't win trophies. So therefore, what happened to their chief, Daniel Levy was forced out of his job a few months ago, and yet he's the most successful chief executive, the most successful chair in the history of the game. So trying to sort of merge those two things, I think, is very, very difficult, and that's why we've ended up with this financial mess. There's not enough emphasis on cash, and there's not enough emphasis on break-even, because club owners, or a proportion of club owners, don't want that.
To Cliff and Rasmus then, I think to look at that, those success has come into this a few times, but what does success actually mean then in the context of what we're talking about here? Do you have to balance the two? Or can you think, okay, I am going to put more, as you said, invest more into the club, be very happy and bring the team on the journey with me, knowing that the bottom line may be taking a hit. But if that total asset value is increasing and the longer term value therefore is going to be there, that is okay.
Of course it's okay, but making it happen is really, really difficult. As you said, and I'm glad you said it, running a football club is the most complex business I've ever come across. I was a chartered accountant in practice before I joined Brentford, and I was advising owner-managed businesses. And football breaks every rule of running a proper business. And although it's a proper business, it's a unique business and unique challenges along the way. And as Rasmus said earlier, you just don't know what's going to happen. You can have positives, you can have negatives, which is why I think, I don't necessarily agree with you. I don't think football is in as big a mess as maybe you think it is. It obviously has lots of challenges, but if you understand how much money you've got to invest, and you've got the money there to do it, and obviously something doesn't happen that prevents that, you have a plan, then it's about making the right decisions and getting results on the pitch. But as Rasmus says, it's really, really hard to do successfully.
And Rasmus, you have the added challenge, I guess, but also you will probably tell us opportunity of running a different type of model, the MCO model, and the value of that has been discussed. The challenges of that we've seen at length this year as well. How is that, or how does that differ, maybe, from what we've heard?
Oh, it gives you more stress. Because you're running one football club is very difficult, but if you run four, at the same time, you you have a lot of bad weekends because unfortunately you get more pain from losing a game, I find, than you get pleasure from winning one, and it's hard to get through a weekend without losing. So from psychological point of view, it's not easy in that sense. But yeah, I think actually, the multi-club model has become very popular, especially with the American investors. To be honest, I think a lot of it, a lot of the promises are very hard to operationalize because football clubs are not normal businesses. They all, even the smallest club in world of football, who has some fans, will think they're the most important club in the world. And the multi-club idea the original idea is to have vertical integration, that one club exists for another club. And I think that can work, but only if the sort of feeder club has no fans or have not many stakeholders interested in it. Then you have the other model, which was the one we did when I was with Cliff at Brentford and Midtjylland. It's more the horizontal integration, or where you have synergies with not one club exists for the other, but they share best practice, they share data models, they share services. And so it's a model like a brother-sister relationship. And so I think that these different models can work, but it's some of the promises I think are a bit overrated. But I also feel like there are synergies, but they are hard to operationalize.
I mean, considering we're talking about profit and sustainability, when you're having a look at what clubs are good for you to invest in and ones that you may pass on, what's the importance between the availability of what we could class as centralized revenue, so what you're getting from a league, whether it's the media deals, versus what you're having to generate independently and the ability that you actually have to operate on your own?
When I look at clubs, it's like recruiting a person really for your company. Is you try and recruit for the things you cannot teach them. So what can you not teach a football club? Well, I think it's a big advantage for a football club to be in a big city, because there's a commercial potential. It's an advantage for revenues to have a big fan base. It can also be a problem sometimes with the pressure and things like that, but it's an advantage. Having a big stadium, because really all revenues in football are somehow linked to performance on the pitch. But if you do well on the pitch, then you want to be able to monetize that success, and you cannot do that if you have a really small stadium, a really small fan base. So I try and look for some of these things that you cannot teach them or very expensive to acquire as a club, because really the product is 11 guys on the pitch. That's almost the easy part of it to change.
An excellent question. I'm just going to dip into the audience for a second, and Kieran, I'm going to put this to you. But the question is, do you think the future will still allow individual owners to remain competitive, or will investment funds become increasingly dominant?
I think given the wealth of some investors, it will become an increasingly rarefied atmosphere, because the benchmark, in order to be able to run a club at this division, at this level, you've got to be no longer a millionaire, you've got to be at least a half a billionaire. And I anticipate that going up. The rewards, as Cliff has been saying, that you look at the entry price and the exit price, yes, you can make a lot of money from that. Equally, we've seen people lose an awful lot of money. Certainly it's sort of second-tier football, where they have gone for that gamble of trying to get promoted, and then they're 200 or 300 million euro down, and their kids are saying, "Dad, that's my inheritance that's just gone on 6 failed centre forwards and managers. We think you to stop," and that can be problematic. So yes, I think the individuals can still do it, but how many individuals at that level, I think we're going to slowly decrease.
I agree.
And let's feed into that question a big topic, which is the presence of debt. And a lot of clubs have debt. And Cliff, the question I would ask really very simply is all debt bad?
Not in my opinion. A lot of clubs rely on owner debt, and by and large owner debt is quasi-equity, particularly if it's interest-free. And so just because it is debt on the balance sheet doesn't mean that the company is or the club is unsustainable. It depends on the terms, obviously, and so what you have to do is obviously manage the external debt, And when you're growing a football club and investing in players and transfer fees that, as Kieran has shown, has gone through the roof, if you haven't got enough of your own debt as an owner, then you have to go externally and you have to borrow. And as long as you do it sensibly, and I go back to what I said at the beginning, if you're borrowing money, make sure it's factored into your cash flows and you understand what happens if this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen, and make sure that you've got all the bases covered.
Kieran, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree. The club with the biggest debt in football, as far as the Premier League is concerned, is Spurs. They borrowed £800 million at 2.5% 2016. That was a transaction of sheer genius. It's not repayable until 2037. In fact, one of the reasons why perhaps we're not seeing a potential takeover of Spurs is that whoever the new owner would be, the banks would be able to renegotiate those loans, and you go from 2.5% interest to 6.5% interest, and things change. So debt is fine, and as Cliff was saying, owner debt, it's a bit like the bank of mum and dad, in the sense that when my daughter passed her driving test, 6 weeks later she wanted me to lend her £20,000 to buy a car. I know that she's never going to repay me. She knows I'm never going to add it back. But in my books, it's debt. In reality, it's equity stroke a gift.
I want to tie in now the second part of this conversation, which really starts to look at how you can address, I guess, some of the cost bases around the challenges that we have. And that is titled here as Fair Play and Regulations. So reading this at the beginning, I looked at it and I thought, well, fair play is an interesting question to ask. Rasmus, what do you think defines fair play?
It's a big question. Should it be fair? You know, it's. I mean, it's just. I welcome ideas on like how football clubs can, operate under regulations that makes it easier for them to control cost bases. I think this we should all welcome that, but I think the challenge is incredibly complex, and especially because football operates across a global system. It's much easier to regulate a single market like the US, where you have 2 or 3 parties and a set of law that you have to operate. But the football clubs are, different restrictions, global game. It's very hard to find, a way, something you can implement across. So, I think you need much brighter brains than me to find a solution to that problem. But it's very complex.
What do we think about the existing regulations in place then? If we're looking at, both European and UK, obviously not wanting to just focus on the UK.
Yeah.
Cliff, where do you think we are at with that?
Well, we're at a very interesting situation at the moment. Obviously, the Premier League, the EFL, we all have regulations. We all work within those regulations. Some arguably haven't, and that's caused issues. And there have been cases and ongoing cases where rules have either been broken or perceived to have been broken. And now we have an independent regulator. And the independent regulator in the UK wants to ensure that clubs are sustainable. And that's really tough. We don't yet know what additional regulation they're going to ask of us as clubs in the UK. And Raz may be able to tell us a bit more about what it's like in France, where I think regulation has proved very problematical. And what we don't want to do is ruin what is arguably the UK's greatest success story, which is the Premier League. So over the next couple of years, it's going to be a very interesting time on the regulatory side of British football.
You were at the first regulator meeting.
I was.
Correct. What could you share from there with how they approached that first touch point, I guess?
Yeah. Look, the panel that spoke, and these are guys working for the regulator, were all very good. They came across well. But by their own admission, These are people who have come from regulatory environments. They don't understand football. And as we said earlier, it's an incredibly complex business. And our job currently as executives at football clubs is to help them understand football. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take them time. So what I would like to see them do is to learn quickly, but also make sure that they don't make too many mistakes. Because, as I say, the last thing you want to do is ruin what is a huge success.
Kieran, what's your exposure to the conversations in and around the regulator been? And have you had any conversations within clubs and maybe some of the executives that are heading them up, either both of things they are optimistic about with the introduction of it, but also things that they may be concerned with?
Well, I'm opposed to the regulator in theory, because if football was able to run itself well, then we wouldn't need a regulator. I think it's an indictment of the failure of the Football Association to show leadership. And also in terms of decision making, I absolutely get this, short-term self-interest decisions has led us to a cost control environment in the Premier League, which for me is very poor, because it encourages creative accounting and it encourages people to circumvent the rules. I think the UEFA rules are actually far better, because they've been prepared independently of the clubs, and therefore there's less self-interest. So I've had interactions with the regulator. I speak to the civil servants on a regular basis. I think they mean well. At the same time, given the salaries that they're being paid, if I was paying a lawyer 10 times as much, I'd run rings around them.
And Rasmus, Cliff alluded to it, if we're looking then at France, a country operating in a very different way, what are the key changes?
The objective in France is different, because the main objective is to make sure that clubs don't go bust. And they don't care about, the French regulator, whether you run with 10 million or 15 million or 20 million losses. They care about that you can prove that you have the funds to follow through on whatever is your business plan. So it's a different objective in France than it is in England. And I think this is, because at the end of the day, we are all we all compete across countries for the same, for in a global market for players. So it's very, you easily get to disadvantage. Financial rules in one country can disadvantage clubs and then give advantage. That's why I mean it's an incredibly complex challenge. And if you were to cap agent fees in England, then agent would put the players in Spain in Italy, where they will pay them the money. So it's a tough job.
It brings into question something that comes up a lot, and it's applied successfully in other regions. Every time it's mentioned in the Premier League or in the context of English football, there are a lot of problems that get raised, particularly from player unions. But if we're looking at salary caps and ways to control some of this, I mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, to me, if we approached it from a European type model where it was a percentage of what you can spend on players, you're almost creating a de facto salary cap anyway. So even if we don't want to call it a salary cap, do we need to be implementing that, or are we implementing that if we do take up a specific type of rules that have, as Kieran, you highlighted, been quite successful in Europe?
Just say no. I mean, that's a very simple thing to do. If players come in or representatives come in demanding wages which are too high, you do have a choice. And ultimately, what I think we have is in the environment of football is that because football is such an emotional environment, is that the finance officer, the chief executive, the owner will say, this is our budget at the start of the season, and then 3 or 4 months later there's a chance of getting into Europe, there's a chance of avoiding relegation if we sign this player, if we pay these wages. And what we have now is a gambling, casino-style environment, and people take off their sensible heads. Alluding to what the rest of the panel have been saying earlier, there have been some incredibly successful people who have come into football who think that they can transfer their success at running a telephone company or property development or a pharmaceuticals company into the football environment football is unique. Football will swallow you up and spit you out. And we've seen this at numerous clubs across the whole of Europe, because if you've got 30,000 people chanting your name on a Saturday afternoon, that affects your ability to make sensible decisions. And it is trying to separate that. And the good clubs, and I very much include Brentford in this, because I say on a regular basis, in my opinion, the best run organisation as far as English football and probably in European football is concerned, is due to the fact that they're able to separate the emotion from the business.
Would you agree with that?
100%.
I mean, obviously the best club in
Oh, no,
business.
well, it's very kind of Kieran to say so, but Kieran's club, Brighton, are also incredibly well run, I have to say. But he's absolutely right. You have to separate the emotion, and that's where successful business people come a cropper, because it's really, really, really tough. I'll never forget, this is a story I've told many times, I'll never forget 2000, I think it was something like 2012, and we just lost at home, and the final whistle went. I'm sitting in the director's box with Matthew, and all of a sudden, to my right, a guy stands up and he says, "Sort it out, Benham." and I looked at Matthew and I thought, oh my God, what does this guy want? And the rest is history, as they say.
When have you found it? Has there been one time that comes to mind where you've felt yourself swayed more on the emotion than good business?
Yeah, playoff finals. They're pretty emotional. A real roller coaster. Interestingly, the Fulham game in 2020 was a real emotional moment, and obviously when we lost, it was really hard to take because we worked so hard to get there. But Matthew and Phil were very focused, and Raz very focused. We know what we're going to do. We're going to come back next year. And actually, against Swansea in 21, the fact that we were 2 up after 20 minutes, I was as calm as I could ever be. But even now, when we're playing against teams that we know are in and around where we are in the Premier League, it's really hard, because they mean so much.
Rasmus, well, I was going to add to it.
Yeah.
Just again, from an MCO perspective, and really just adding the value when you're looking at opportunities to be profitable, to make money, what player trading actually means within how you're running the club and the ability to unlock maybe some of those key markets, which can give you a really good access to some talent.
Yeah. No, I always found the most interesting thing operating in football is that intersection between sporting ambitions and then financial success as well. How do you maximize your performance on the pitch per pound spent? That's the challenge we all trying to crack. And I think player trading is for most business models in football are very, very, very important. Like now in Turkey, we are running a profitable club, but based on player trading and player development, and that has become an opportunity because the transfer market has grown as much as it has, and this is the fascinating thing about how you obviously can find players at low cost and sell them, develop them and sell them at high prices. And I think that's for me that's the whole that's what makes football management so interesting and fascinating.
How hard is it to ensure that the talent that you have, if you've got an emerging talent at Giuseppe, let's say, and you want to bring them to another one of your clubs, you also, I imagine, have to fight off some interested parties in other areas?
Yeah, that's why I say it's a thankless task in some way. I remember there was a summer where we were buying a couple of players for Southampton that we then put on loan to Giuseppe, and actually it made great sense for both teams. Like Southampton would buy 2 young players that could come back and they create value in the first team, and Giuseppe would get 2 players they would never be able to attract as a standalone club. But nevertheless, the fans in Southampton thought, why are you spending our money on Giuseppe? And Giuseppe fans was like, we don't want to be the backyard of Southampton, So it's not easy to make everyone happy.
Protecting the badge.
Yeah.
Protecting the badge. Rasmus, we had a question in advance from one of our attendees, and it really focused on club leaders that have an opportunity to do things themselves, or you can hire someone else to do what they're good at. And they highlighted the fact that, if you're at a Man City, you can afford maybe to have some of these individuals and experts. But if you're a smaller club, you maybe can't always do the same. So how do you make those decisions? How do you decide which parts of the business to bring in a specialist, if we want to call them that, versus what is maybe more broadly taken on by the wider executive?
Well, for me, I would say it's finance. Finance is the font of all knowledge within a business. Managing, I keep repeating myself, but managing the finances is so fundamental. So having someone who is strong on finance is number one priority. And then once you have that, then it's about building the management team. Obviously, the CEO and the director of football are such important roles within the running of a football club. But if you can get the alignment across the club and vertically and horizontally, then I think that's a lot of why we have been successful.
So basically, finance teams locked in.
Well, yeah, because if you get the cash flow wrong, I mean, we've all seen examples of finance directors of public companies lose their job because they made a mistake in finance and they got put the wrong numbers out. So finance is, and you run out of cash, where do you go then? So,
Kieran, we've seen, there was an interesting article the last couple of days I saw where it looked at sporting directors as individual employees of clubs and how closely linked they are now to the tenures of managers. Yeah. We saw in the presentation a little bit earlier about the average tenure of a manager. But previously, and Michael Emenalo was the example used in this article, stating his continuity, if we want, at Chelsea, while, of course, the manager merry-go-round was in place. Now, there does seem to be more of a direct association with some of the managers that a club has, and therefore when the manager leaves, the sporting director often moves on.
And it seems to me, as an external person, it makes little sense. Because when you're sacking the manager, it's a convenient panic button for the owner perhaps to press, because it takes the heat off them, it buys more time. We have a culture in society that change is the same as an improvement. And that's simply, it's not the case economically, it's not the case necessarily politically, it's not the case in football. And you've only got to look at what happened at Nottingham Forest. They had a poor start to the season, they changed the manager. 6 weeks later, they changed the manager. And you're hoping that it's going to work. I do work for the League Managers Association back in England. And as an academic, we put out data. And the evidence is that changing the manager doesn't improve things. Occasionally it does, but that actually often tends to coincide with a number of other factors. A player comes back from injury, or actually you've had some unlucky results or some results against better opposition and you've lost and you've made that decision. You then have 4 matches against clubs who are struggling themselves and you get better results, and it's down to the manager. I think the cult of the manager is an issue. And the sporting director who should be there to provide that continuity, because the cost, as we've seen from the original slides, the cost of changing a manager and the increase in fees and the decrease in the value of the existing squad is horrendous. But these decisions do appear in some clubs, the less well-run clubs, seem to be done on a convenience basis, and that's because the owners are running the clubs as extensions of their own egos rather than as a traditional business.
I think there is another thing to add to that, which is like, and it's an interesting trend you're describing, because sporting directors, I think, are becoming more like managers. And really it's a problem for the finances of a football club, because a sporting director and a manager are much more likely to get a bigger job somewhere else by reckless spending and winning a title than having a sustainable business model and finishing 5th. And this creates this misalignment of incentives between shareholders and owners and the guys that operate the business. And this is another factor that puts a lot of pressure on the cost side. And I didn't read the article, but I think it's an interesting trend that I think if you are in the market, you feel that this is what's happening.
Cliff, around your performance structure, What do you feel about it? You know, when we actually look at the success of Brentford, what do you feel about the structure that has worked so well for you?
Well, when I first got involved in football back in 2011, one of the things I could never understand as an advisor to businesses was how when clubs got rid of managers, it wasn't just the manager. It was a team. There was like 4, 5, 6 people that all went. And the cost, as Kieran says, astronomical. So Brentford, obviously, what we've created is a core team of people that are employees of the football club. And they are there on a longer term basis and are part and parcel of the structure and the fabric of the club. And then what we've done over the years is Raz brought in Thomas Frank in 2015 as a third coach. And then when he became head coach, when Dean Smith and Richard, his assistant, left, we lost 2. We gained Thomas, he got an assistant. And then as things develop and people move on, those, instead of losing 6 or 8 people, the physios and the doctor and all of the strength and conditioning, because they're part and parcel of the club, they stay, and it's just effectively the head coach and the assistant coach generally that move on. And that's, for me, was made much more business sense to do it that way, because changing 6 or 8 people, to my mind, makes no sense at all. So that's the structure we've developed at Brentford.
Kieran, out of my intrigue personally, you sit on the outside of all of this looking in, and you're asked to have an opinion on so many different things within this world that we're talking about. How easy is it for you to be able to actually put into context everything that we're talking about here when we're looking at different models, we're looking at different systems? If we highlighted at the beginning, as we said, it's actually so difficult to even have the conversation because of the different markets you operate in and the regulations that come into play. So just from my side, being able to break that down in a way that can then be educational for people seems like a huge challenge in itself.
Well, I think Cliff summarised earlier. We all understand the value of $1, of a pound, of a euro. So by putting football into that common language and then identifying, that's the what. So I think where you add value as a commentator on the business is that if you can explain the why. So what is the difference in culture between the trophy asset owners versus the profit maximizer owners versus the influence maximizer owners and so on. And that culture which is set by those people flows through into what you see on the pitch, but that ultimately also flows through into the finances. And that allows you to identify, this is where we're seeing growth, this is where we're seeing increase in losses, this is where we're seeing changes in debt and so on. And ultimately, it all starts at the very top from the owners setting that culture, and it flows through, and being able to quantify it is something which is universally understandable, because we all know that 2 is bigger than 1. And ultimately, that's all I talk about is okay, we've got one number is bigger than another, let's explain why, and let's identify the drivers of that. And I think that's where the interesting things, from my point of view, arise, because that allows me to sort of, as an academic, to go into the core factors which are driving change.
With it being front and center of everyone's minds, as we've highlighted, let's have a look at maybe the area or areas from all of you that you think are opportunities that we're not actually fully maximizing. Rasmus, is there anything right now across your clubs that you can think of where we are not currently making the most of the opportunity, or where there is an opportunity to develop something existing that hasn't properly been delivered?
I think player development is still very under-optimized. And I think it's, from a financial point of view, it makes a lot of sense to invest in that, because the economics of developing a player is more attractive than buying a player most often. And I think football is still behind many other sports when it comes to proper player development and detailed player development. And I think those clubs who can, put these systems in place through academies or multi-club maybe, they will get an advantage.
Cliff, an interesting time. Well, actually, it was a great answer to throw to you based on, I guess, the structure of Brentford as well, and player development.
It's, I think, where we have really failed, in my opinion, is the development of coaches in the UK. I don't feel that there's anywhere near enough good quality coaches, particularly at the academy level. So that's an area where I think we could do more, and that plays in nicely to what Rasmus is saying, is because you will ultimately be more successful if you can develop academy players. We all hear about how important it is for clubs to sell academy players because it's pure profit in the current profit and sustainability rules. So I think that's, for me, that's an area where we should be investing more money to develop better coaches, because I think that will be good for the game as a whole. And then obviously from my point of view right now, the regulator and regulation generally, profit and sustainability versus squad cost ratio, these are really current topics where nobody's quite sure how it's all going to pan out, but it's going to be challenging for all of us.
I think it's a case of, I agree with the guys, that being smarter is actually a really good thing. And the success of the smaller clubs, how do you constantly punch above your weight, and why are some Galactico clubs underperforming? It comes down to what is the focus of the club. Do they just want to be seen to be spending big, or do they want to be seen to be spending smart? I think the other area, if we're looking at it as growth from a business point of view, and as a football fan, these are all the things which I fear, is the fact that taking the Premier League overseas is potentially beneficial. Moving to a different dynamic pricing structure for tickets for big clubs makes an awful lot of sense, but for a club like Brentford or the club that I support, Brighton, it doesn't, because we're dependent upon a core fan base. I think that there will be change. I think the way that we consume the broadcast product, I think, will be, over the course of the next 10 years, is going to be hugely impactful, because there's no doubt that the big clubs want to not give the money to the smaller clubs. They feel that it is theirs by right, and they're not interested in having a league which is genuinely competitive, where nobody knows at the start of the match what the results are going to be, and they want to replicate what you see perhaps in Scotland, what you see in France and elsewhere, as far as their individual leagues. And that battle for football's sort of heart and soul will be an interesting one, whether we're a regulator or not.
Yeah, agreed.
Rasmus, there was something in there mentioned that you may be able to comment on. We had a chat with Pablo Longoria recently, the president of Marseille, and he was running us through the shift in the media model, obviously, that's gone on in France, and how that had seriously impacted the revenues, of course. Basically what he was doing when we were really trying to figure out how you could even protect against it was he said it was Champions League or significant damage to a club of that size. And so if you weren't at that level, it's potentially very hard to compete. Profit, sustainability, but let's look at sustainability here if you are looking at France now. Do you think that D2C model, while it may be problematic and more painful right now, does provide an opportunity in a fragmenting and changing media landscape?
Possibly. I mean, in France, clubs are obviously forced to look that way and maybe have this, direct-to-consumer model, which actually, in a way, also makes a lot of sense for Premier League to do. I think it has a lot more potential, but it's very there's a lot more to lose doing it. And in France, there's nothing to lose anymore. So maybe that will provide a good lab for testing that model. Because the deal obviously completely collapsed, and there will these are the things, circumstance that will give rise to new types of business models and the creativity. I think I'm a big believer that that's the moments for innovation, not just to look at the sit in the corner and feel sorry for yourself.
Cliff, how often does it come up in Premier League meetings?
Sorry?
How often does it come up in Premier League meetings?
Normally once a year at Strategy Day when we talk about the future. But we all know it's coming. Yeah. D2C it will be here, and I think Kieran's right. Sometime in the next 10 years, that shift from the broadcast model to D2C is going to be quite a challenge to manage, and ultimately it's going to be, I think, hugely beneficial for the really big clubs, and will be difficult for the smaller clubs. We've got over 5 million followers now on social media. How many of them would actually pay to watch us is another matter. But you know, when we got promoted to the Championship back in 2014, we had about 25 to 50,000 followers.
Really?
So the growth has been exponential. Obviously, the last 4.5 years in the Premier League, it's really grown enormously. But followers is very different to people who are going to put their hand in their pocket and pay to watch you.
I want to finish on one just for Kieran, because I saw it on here as a question from the audience and thought you'd love this one. Manchester United appear to be making strides towards sustainability. If on the pitch success follows, what's the financial upside?
Well, if you're saying sacking 400 people is a step in the right direction, I'm not sure that I agree, because I also see the largesse of expenditure elsewhere at the club, in the sense that if you spend £250 million in a single transfer window and you save £12 million in terms of salaries, all of those transactions have to be successful. A club such as Manchester United, which is a squad which costs around about €1.5 billion, it should be challenging for trophies. So yes, it's moving in the right direction. My personal view is that the culture of the people at the top is a classic evidence of people that don't understand football, and they're treating it in the same way as other industries. Whether that will prove to be successful in due course, we'll find out.
A hugely impactful way to wrap up what is a fascinating topic and what has been a brilliant panel, and I thank you all so much for joining for this. It's been brilliant to hear all of your insights.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.